project. So I will, without further ado though, I will get into the program because it's long. So, as many of my talks are. But I will kind of speed through parts of it because it is long. Anyway, it's basically this trip that I was on in May 10th, or May 4th through 10th of 2010. A group of us, the Rare Plants of Baja, California, our project group, which is doing the rare, endangered, and endemic flora of Baja, of the California floristic province portion of northwestern Baja, California, Mexico, went on this trip and was really quite eye-opening. An amazing flora. So, I don't know if I don't think I have any pointer. But you can see Guadalupe Island is down here. There. Ah, okay. Just the big dot. Oh, the big dot. All right. Okay, right there. And that the floristic province generally goes to, this is Punta Baja, and it's usually El Rosario is right about there, and CFP Baja is like that. Plus this. That's a spot, that, and the other islands along the coast here. And Guadalupe Island is a volcanic island. It's never been connected up to the mainland. The indigenous peoples never discovered it. It's that far off the coast. I mean, when you consider that the indigenous peoples were all the way out on all of Southern California's islands and all of these, but they never got out to Guadalupe. So there were no land mammals before Europeans. That's a key thing. Oops. Okay, so Guadalupe Island itself, this is just sort of the natural features. You'll see a number of these in the slides. Mount Augusta is here. It's very tall. That's 1,294 meters, so over 4,000 feet, or right around 4,000 feet. The Monterey Pines and the Quercus tomentellas are out on this part of the island. We'll see more slides. El Picacho is there. You'll see that peak in a number of photos. And then down at the south end of the island with these islets down here. Islote Toro and Islote Zapato. And Isole Negro. Isolote Negro, which is the home of one of Dudley Guadalupensis. And then sort of the human habitations. Okay, this is the main place where people live currently, Campo Oeste, and we'll go there. Down here is the military base at Punta Sur. And then some of these other places are seasonally occupied or not at all these days. And then right up here is the field center where we stayed. That's how we got there, by plane. And there is this one airstrip in the middle of the island. And that's our field crew. Some of these people you probably know or have heard of. Clockwise from the left, Sula Vanderplank, Steve Junak from Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, Julio Hernandez Montoya with HESE, the Mexican Island Conservation Group, Alan Harper of Terra Peninsular, Tom Oberbauer, longtime CNPS member of San Diego County, and expert on the islands, and John Redman of San Diego Museum of Natural History, and probably the major botanical force in Baja, California currently. That's the field station itself. The brown building off to the left is the kitchen. The little thing next to it is the internet connection, our only way off the island. And then those are some storage buildings. That yellow truck there is how you get around on the island, and there's a rack on the back and you stand up. It's quite bumpy. And then these are where we stayed, and you can see there's a greenhouse there where they were formerly growing some plants. Very nice setup there. And the Guadalupe cypresses there at the field station. This is the North Grove. And the last of the goats were removed in 2007, so 3 years before we were there. That made a huge difference. John Redman had been on the island about 5 years previous, and he said he never wanted to go back unless they did remove all of the goats, because there was just nothing there. And there were a number of places where you could see skeletons of the goats around. There had been up to 100,000 goats on the island, and the island is only about 96 square miles, so you can guess the density of the goats. They ate everything. And then there was also a fire in September of 2008 that burned down much of the North Grove of the Guadalupe cypresses. But as you can see there in the foreground, almost all of these things here are seedlings coming back. So cypresses in general are fire followers. The cones open due to fire. And so no exception here. And again, in other parts of the island, we were seeing even larger ones that had started coming up after the goats were removed. So this was actually, what I'm doing now is showing you kind of how we moved around the island. So the first day we got there, we just went up to the field station and we're walking around nearby there. And so some of these plants you'll see several times during the talk, and others you'll only see once. So Acmispon grandiflorus or Lotus grandiflorus, out on the islands they're quite red. There is miner's lettuce. Saw some very large groups of these around, but it's all subspecies mexicana. Githopsis, this is an island endemic. And again, you see it right next to Philago californica. This is a tiny plant, only about an inch high. Flowers are pale purple to pale blue. Solanum cloquii. This actually, there's discussion about, this may even be an entirely different species. No one is sure yet. The island solanums, the Wallacei, cloquii, etc., are a confusing group to work with. And you'll see later how this plant grew in the other cypress forest. And after the fire, all these Ceanothus came up. And there have been no Ceanothus on the island for about 100 years. This one, we're not even sure what it is, because again, they're too young. You'll see two other types of Ceanothus that we did find as well. But you'll see this one has holly-like leaves. There again is another one of these Ceanothus, and look at that growth habit. It's almost like a Ceanothus gloriosus, but there's never been any sort of gloriosus or prostrate form of Ceanothus ever recorded for the island. and that's Calistegia macrostegia with it. Again, the North Grove, there's not a whole lot of it left because so much of it did burn down in the fire. And the fire was started by accident, by burning garbage. And then it just kept going and going and going because there was no way to put it out. It was going for weeks, just at very low levels. But Ceanothus arboreus is also out there, and it was never recorded. Even the earliest botanists did not see this plant. It had already been eliminated by goats. So the seed bank there had to have been from before the 1850s, and that's still coming back. And you'll see some of those out in other parts of the island, seedlings that we were finding. And again, this is just sort of dotted around. It is one of the biggest, showiest Ceanothus, and it is a little bit different from the ones on the northern Channel Islands. So it may be that this gets some sort of recognition as well. So when we were out there, sort of no one had been out botanizing there very much since the goats had been removed. So we saw all kinds of things that no one had seen before. And it was also a period of very, very nice weather. We were all told that it would be very windy, it'd be really foggy, and it'd be real cold and kind of miserable. And it just wasn't. The fog was always down low and just offshore. But it was also very, very rough water. So we had been planning on going to all of the little islets and stuff, and we weren't able to do that because even the fishermen were not going out at all because the seas were so rough. But that's what we were doing, just documenting everything, collecting everything. This is the plant that's on the back table, Senecio palmeri. And that's just how it is growing out there now. Nobody really knows how these plant communities really were working beforehand because there are no real good accounts of what the where the vegetation was on the island. And so now it's just all sort of a hodgepodge, everything mixed together. You certainly see the northern part of the island is wildly different from the south. But other than that, it's sort of anybody's guess how these things used to be. But Senecio palmeri is one of the spectacular endemics to the island. There you see the white powder puff type infrutescences. You'll see it again several times during the talk in full bloom and so on at higher elevation. That's it again. And then that's sort of how you saw the plants, particularly the Ceanothus. Here's one, there's one, there's one, and there's one. That's one over there. They're just widely scattered. And again, this is from a seed bank that's over 150 years old. So very impressive how long these seeds can persist. Frutily and Cana, the Guadalupe Island rock cress. This is a plant that's been in horticulture for years. It's a little bit on the tender side for up here, and it's reminiscent to the what's it called now? Costantia navinii. Used to be Areophyllum navinii from the Channel Islands. This is sort of similar to that, except this is bigger. And that's probably about 3 plants there. You'll see more details of it later as well. And again, the Ceanothus, this time with Lupinus niveus. When Lupinus niveus has been discussed, many times people said it was an annual, simply because they never saw them as perennials out there. You'll see some big ones shortly. Again, just the Ceanothus. Very pretty. These plants all look like they're about 5 years old. And they'll get much bigger. And there you have some of the seedling ones of the Ceanothus. There, 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 there. Anyway, they're just dotted around. And many of them will survive and thrive now that there are no goats. The only things that are still out there as far as exotic mammals are house mice. Amazingly, house mice are out there, and cats. And so the cats are eating the mice, but they're trapping the cats to get rid of the cats so that some of the birds will be happier, because there are a number of endemic ground nesting birds. There you also see the lotus again on this volcanic landscape. All of the island is volcanic. There's a lot of different volcanic periods there, and you'll see some broader scale landscape shots as well. It is very rocky. All the soil that may have been there has been long since washed away because of the overgrazing by the goats. And that's the first of the large Pinus radiatus, the first dead ones that you come across. We found seedlings of Monterey pines, though, at least a mile south of these. So the seeds do blow from the north to the south and are getting established. But again, who knows what the resulting forest will look like. Again, these trees were old and massive because there have been no regeneration for 150 years. So you can see that's actually when we found this new species right there, where everyone is clustering. It's a new species of pseudonephalium, which is quite interesting. There is, Julio had told us that he had found this plant that he didn't know what it was, and he wanted us to tell him what it was. And we all looked at it and we all said, well, it's nothing that should be here. And so it took quite a while to decide what it actually is, but it is a new species of pseudonephalium. And you'll see more of it. There's actual seedlings of it. It probably was hanging out on the steep north-facing cliffs of the island where no one could see or get access to. And when we see more of them, what's interesting about it is as these heads mature, these little branchlets of flower heads break off, and then the wind blows them around. And so that's how the seeds then lodge in rock crevices and get started again. It's quite a showy thing. It almost looks like it's filling the niche of a buckwheat. Those large flat heads, and there's usually lots of insects on them. And you can see there's ladybugs there and lots of other insects. Lots and lots of bugs on the island. And there's some areas where there's lots and lots of this thing. And so it's kind of amazing that no one had ever seen this thing before when we were seeing it in such abundance. This is at the far northeast end of the island, sloping down toward that point. And you can see a lot of the pines are coming up there too. It's really quite amazing to see how rapidly the island is recovering. And there again, just not knowing where the Ceanothus arboreus would be or how, seeing them here and there and there and there and there and there, you just sort of wonder, were they all over the place and the goats ate them immediately or what? Or are they there just because that's where the seeds ended up after everything else got eaten? But clearly, again, they've been absent for a long, long time. Here's actually this is the end of the road, and you have these little ATVs that we were driving with to get out here later. But this is one of the exclosures that they had done around one of the real old trees a number of years ago. And you can see how big some of those resulting seedlings are. And they are getting to the point of being mature. We did see the first cones on a number of these individuals in this particular exclosure. But this is also how the Mexican government decided that, yes, there really was a possibility of this island regenerating if they got rid of the goats. And it is managed as a preserve now. But again, just walking around on the island, and that is one of the biggest individuals we saw of the pseudonephalium. That's like that's one big one, and who knows how many more there are there. More of the solanum, very attractive. This was something that had been thought to be extinct for a long time, and that's it in full bloom. And the plant is very, very, very tiny. That's about 1.5 inches tall, and the flowers are like less than 1/8 of an inch. Saturrea palmeri. It's interesting that it's just found in this one group of lava rocks, and not anywhere else at the north end of the island. But we did rediscover it at a new place where it hadn't been seen in over 150 years, and it was full size, and full-size flowers, which you'll see later. The Peridolian cana, just how big they can get, and that in the distance is another one of the few pines. There's Acmispon argiphilus argenteus, one of the silver lotus, and Linanthus pygmaeus. This, I think I was the only person that really saw this because I went a different way out the north end. There is another member called the subspecies continentalis that is on the mainland that's much more common. But this was just in one small spot. And there were some more Gathopsis, again, with better color. And that's in the Campanulaceae. Looking down, and this is one of the things that the other people were doing when I was up doing that other stuff. Others were down here looking at the palms. All these blobs that you see that look like lumps are all Brahea edulis, the Guadalupe Island fan palm. Most people, when you ask them, say that there's just one palm native to California, but when you look at the whole of the California floristic province, there are 3. There's not only our Washingtonia, but then there's Brahea edulis and Brahea armata, the blue Hesper palm on the northwest Baja mainland. And that gets to within about 10, 15 miles of the international border. So it's not unheard of that they might show up with climate change. There are also some interesting tar weeds out on the island. Many of them are perennials. This is Deinandra frutescens, one of the larger ones. It was early for them to be blooming, but we saw individuals of all the species in flower anyway. This is a perennial. And there you see them with the pines, and that's not in an exclosure, so some of those pines have actually been growing for a little bit of time. Because again, they didn't get rid of all the goats all at once. It took quite a number of years. But there have been none spotted since 2007. And they use the same system with Judas goats that was used on the California islands. Hazardia cana, there were a lot of these that had come up around the north grove of Guadalupe cypresses, but when that forest burned, most of these burned there, and we didn't see hardly any of this plant on the island, very few. This one was at the north end. That's Lupinus niveus. It is a spectacular plant, and it was quite curious because I was very interested in getting seeds of it, and I did get seeds of it. You can see it has very white foliage, brilliant blue flowers, very fragrant. But interestingly, at the north end of the island, the seeds were all pretty much uniformly black. And then as you went south on the island, this plant did occur the whole distance. At the south end of the island, where it was a lot more sandy and gravelly soil, the seeds were speckled black and white. And there was sort of a gradient. So I could tell almost by looking at the seed collection what part of the island it came from. And that's the north point of the island, the northeast point. It almost always has that fog bank over it, and it's very windy there. But these lupins were quite large. Some of the individuals were about 6 feet across, and again, just white foliage. And nice blue flowers. And you can see gigantic seed pods. And there were lots of ladybugs all over, and they were biting. That is that north bit without fog on it. I think that was the only day that there really wasn't fog on it. And later on that day, it got fogged in again. And some of those trees out there are oaks, island oaks. There's also Orthocarpus or Castanea attenuata, the valley tassels. They look a little bit different though than the mainland ones. And there you see some of the oaks with some of the pines. That's one of the oaks, that's pine. Those are oaks, pines. And the new species. The new species was very abundant at this part of the island. There are some of the oaks. Again, most of the soil's been washed away, so we didn't see any natural regeneration happening of the oaks. So they're probably going to need more intervention. And again, that north slope is extremely steep. And it was very windy. And you can see there are even palm trees down there. So, I mean, thinking about it, where have you seen oaks, pines, and palms? I couldn't think of any place. And Aphanes occidentalis, another plant that's actually even found up here. This is the furthest south it goes. And Pentagramma triangularis. Some very familiar plants, even from the Bay Area, are down there. Polypodium californicum. And there's even Polypodium schooleri, but we didn't see it. More of the fog, the fallen pines. Again, and you can see how highly eroded that slope is over on the left. Then on our way back, we stopped at this bluff just because there were so many interesting plants there. Most of those are Senecio palmeri, but then when we look down, this is how we almost always found Lavatera occidentalis. It would just be a single plant, or sometimes two and rarely three, and just sort of there in the middle of nowhere. Clearly another goat favorite. And these were scattered all over the island as well, but in very limited quantities. We didn't hike down to that because it was too steep. So that was the first day. Second day, we went more toward the south, or, well, actually, no, we started out because the field station is right up there. That is the cypress forest, and this is the part that Reed Morin called the circus. It's this big half circle of a caldera. The other half of it fell into the ocean eons ago. And this is the site of the only water source on the island now. There's only one spring. That, again, the lupin with one Lavatera. And that's all Avena. Avena is happy there. Looking to the south. That is the only melasma lorina left on the island. It was like twice that size 5 years ago when John Redmond saw it, but then half of it broke off. And you can see it had been fenced even before the goats were removed. And it's declining. Calandrinia, red maize, with Silene gallica, exotic. Trifolium palmeri, an island clover. This was scattered about. More peridili. We saw some gigantic peridiles in this area. They're in flower heads, nice dissected foliage. There are two Spiralcias that no one can tell apart. Spiralcias are always kind of a pain anyway, and both of these are yellow. So this one, we all decided was Sulfrea, and you can see how heavily blooming that is, and that's about 5 feet across or more. So these are big plants. And there they are, just dotted around. Yeah, palmeri, the plants look yellowish, and Sulfrea, the plants look whitish, but they both have flowers that look the same. More Sulfrea. And then actually we did find some that had these pinkish or orangish flowers as well. And again, decided those were palmeri. Lupinus bicolor. We only found this at the north end of the island as well. And then we went to Mount Augusta, which is the high point on the island. And again, you can see all of those unique dotted shrubs. And again, it's sort of anybody's guess as to what would have been there. And that's looking from the northeast. It's actually quite steep to the east. That's the Senecio palmeri. That's it in bloom, up almost on the peak. And it does get snow here. It usually doesn't last that long, but so it's highly possible that seed collections from the high points may have a little bit of frost tolerance in them. And again, nice yellow daisy flowers. It's a very pretty thing. And peridili in full bloom. Nice big heads. Usually there's a lot of insects on them. Yeah, that's the Guadalupe Island rock cress. And then Ceanothus. We found some larger Ceanothus with entire leaves, but no fruits. And since fruits are needed for real diagnosis of these, we're just saying this could be cuneatus. But with those very tomentose new twigs, it's definitely an interesting thing. And that's about how big they were. Again, just big moundy things. We took a number of herbarium specimens. And we were trying to get Julio to come back and get fruiting ones so we could really tell what it was. And that's just looking back toward the north point. Looking to the south. And again, there's Picacho, the point, and then the two outer islands to the south. And you can see all of these young cypress trees coming up. It's really quite interesting to see how much is happening there so quickly. And this just reminds me of that part of Macbeth when they say, the forest advanced. It looks like they're just coming towards you. And that's what they think that the forest used to occupy all of that northern end of the island. And actually even with some groves down as far as the middle. But they think it used to be a solid population. And now it's just right there and right here. And it probably will spread out again. It's just who knows how far. And you can see there's really a lot of variation in what these trees look like. Some are very green, some are bluish, some are sort of gumdrop shaped, others are very upright. There's clearly a lot of genetic diversity here within this population. And that many of them, and what happened to many of the trees, particularly those that burned, the goats ate all of the bark down here on many of them, and then the trees were always healing it over with new cambium, but there was frequently exposed dead wood toward the base, and this fire was moving very slowly, and it would just get into those little crevices of dead wood and burn the trees out from the inside. And then they would fall over. But again, lots of regeneration is happening. And they do have these very attractive trunks and bark. Again, some of them are more blue. This one did have a lot of cones on the outer parts, which isn't that common. Usually the cones are inside. And you can see in back of it, it's a very green one. And lots of fallen ones and lots of young ones. The dicolastemmas out on the island are gigantic, kind of like the ones you see on Santa Cruz Island. They can be up to about 3 feet or so in height, and just big. The solanum again, I think, yes. This is why it seems like it could be something else. All that seems to be clonal and just spreading underground. And again, those are only about 18 inches high with big flowers. That's looking back toward Mount Augusta. Then the Alophyllum gilioides on the left, and Gilia navinii, which is an island endemic, which is also on the California Channel Islands, but it's the only Gilia, so it's very easy to work with Gilias out on Guadalupe. So that's the Gilia, that's the Alophyllum. The Alophyllum has usually just 3 leaflets that are prominent, with then some other smaller ones, whereas the Gilia is quite divided. But it was interesting to have them both side by side. That flower is a little bit out of focus, but you can see they look very similar. And then this was one of the things that was one of our big finds. It hadn't been seen since 1885, and that's the Lavatera or Clinopedilum palmeri in the cypress forest. And these were bigger plants. The ones at the north end of the island that were only about 1 inch to 1.5 inches tall, these are about 6 inches tall. They're clearly a lot happier in this environment. There's one plant. I mean, or you can see several individual plants there. That's one, this is one, that's one, there, and those. It was really quite interesting to find these. We just found them in this one spot, and yes, that is bromus to the left. One wonders how the weeds are going to go over the years. But there they are, just dotted around through the rocks in the cypress forest. And there was also Diplicus latifolius, which is found on some of our Channel Islands as well. And again, these were tiny ones. We did see some bigger ones later. And that's at the Clinopedilum site with Steve and Alan. And you can see the fallen cypresses. Quite an interesting spot. We found this at the end of the day. You always find good stuff at the end of the day. More lupins. Yeah, it's really an intense blue. And that white foliage. Okay, so the next day, going further south. That's the only Lupinus guadalupensis we found. John Redmond spotted it while we were driving. Said, wait, stop. And we stopped and we got out, and sure enough. Yep, seed pods. The Spiralcias again, and the Calistegias everywhere. This is toward the middle part of the island. There wasn't quite as much diversity. And then this is the central highlands toward the airport. I think I'm standing on the runway. And yes, not everyone gets off. There were several wrecks around. Made you a little bit uneasy. And then one of the spectacular endemics, Tritolea guadalupensis, as Sula, who's British, said, this is the kind of plant that would be in my grandmother's garden. They're big inflorescences. They're about 6 inches or more across, and they're just dozens of these bright yellow trumpets. They were pretty much toward the end of their flowering, and again, you can see it's almost about 3 feet tall as well, because the dicolastemma is, and that you can see the number of flowers in some of those heads. Did get good seed collections of this, and we're sowing them this fall. Yeah, it's really quite a lovely thing. You could see that as a cut flower, or almost like an alstroemeria. We did see a few butterflies, but apparently there's no really super unusual butterfly on the island. And Lotus is a weed. And then we found the Ascholtzias on the island are quite interesting. There are at least 3 taxa, Ramosa, elegans, and palmeri. And there's also Dodecathion, or now Primula clevelandii. These we only saw in seed and fruit. These were huge plants, though. You can see them in there with the dicolastemmas and the avena, and they're not being overwhelmed. Some of those plants were about 18 inches or more high. So really big for a dodecaphion. And there are a lot of ground nesting birds out on the island because there are very few trees. And right now we're in the middle part of the island where there are no trees and almost no shrubs. So yeah, mourning dove nest, and just sort of scared them as we were walking around. This was a day Steve Junak and I went to this one area with the rest of them, went to investigate a giant green dot that they could see on Google Earth and wanted to see what it was. And we said, it's probably not going to be anything interesting, and we'd rather go somewhere else. So we did. And we found many more interesting things, and what they found was a gigantic calistegia. So this was one of the areas that Steve and I went to that day. We basically hiked from over here, and then up here, and then down, and then up here, and over there, and then out. Those are just some old lava flows that are caps on the more erodible understory. One of the only things we found that was really different was this one Cylindropuntia prolifera, which I remember from my trip to, or several trips to San Clemente Island. It's the dominant plant at the south end of that island, and it's a plant I hate because of my experiences there. But this was the only one that we found on the island. And it's right on the edge. I mean, that's right on the cliff edge. I'm sure that there will be bazillions more in the future. Just to give you an idea of the scale of that area, that's Steve there on the left at the saddle between these two plateaus. And another plant that we found there, growing again in those rock crevices, Antirrhinum natalianum subsp, native snapdragon. We ended up seeing it in several places, and then found this piece of wood, and there's no shrubs, no trees anywhere nearby. I collected that. I was thinking it could be juniper, because there's still one juniper on the island, but it's something that a wood anatomist would be able to tell fairly clearly, or fairly easily what it is. I just haven't gotten it to somebody yet, but I'm still traveling around with it. And there are a lot of birds, although birds are hard to photograph. But this thing, the Guadalupe Island rock wren, just comes right up to check out what you're doing. And this was because we had found some more Lavatera occidentalis, and they are just absolutely covered with bugs, these little tiny beetles. And the bird would come by and eat the beetles. Again, it's not a pretty Lavatera, unfortunately. The nice one is on outer islet, when it's a bright red, Lindsay eye. So that was all through the middle part of the island. And then the next day, we went over toward, I think this is the day toward Campo Oeste. Yep. So this is the west side of the island that really gets a lot of the brunt of the ocean action. And you can see how rough the water was, and no fog whatsoever, but no wind. Pretty amazing. That's a lighthouse there up on the top. Lighthouses in Baja are pretty low-key. This is the settlement. Everybody is part of a cooperative. And once the children reach the age of about, 8, 9, they are moved to Ensenada and are put in schools there. But that also gives you the idea of how tall the island is.
Bart, what is that terrace? The terrace is on the side of
Those are just different lava flows. It's all volcanic. There's nothing else.
What do they do for water?
There is the one spring, and they truck it here. They typically go every day with a truck over to the spring, fill it up, and then drive back. And I guess everybody's really frugal with water because it's not that much. I don't think I got pictures of that. But so what we decided to do was hike up that canyon. It doesn't look as that bad. That makes it look really bad. And it wasn't, although it wasn't easy. And at the bottom of it, those are elephant seals. This is the southern elephant seals. So these are even bigger than the northern ones. And this is them. And those are just the juveniles and some females. And they are enormous. The males had already left. There they are. They were pretty inert. I mean, and they are just lying there. That one in the foreground was moving. It was the only one. Atroplex barclayana was down near the coast, just in the rocks up above. Very nice silvery plant. Grown at Rancho. It is frost tender, but beautiful foliage. Mirabilis. There are several taxa that have been described from the island. And Gilead Navinii again, some bigger ones in this wash that we were hiking up. And that was when we found the biggest of the Diplacus. And everybody was photographing it. That's it. And you can see everyone is happy, happy, happy. And that's the plan. Very pretty little thing. And there were a lot of lotuses, again, the Argophilus argenteus. Not as silvery as you see them on our Channel Islands. And again, there's only one Mentzelia out on the island, so that makes it easy. Again, Mentzelia micrantha. Some of these were big, like this, others were quite tiny. And that's a little Lepidium to the right. Phacelia floribunda, a nice pale blue flowered species. We saw that in several places. And the Galvesia, or now Gambelia. Many people grow this, speciosa, the one from our Channel Islands as well. But look at the length of that inflorescence. I have never seen any Galvesia Gambelia with such long inflorescences. And this whole plant was not very big. Just again, another view of it. And the leaves are huge. Fridley emerii, found there in abundance, as it is out in the deserts. More Antirrhinum, but in better flower. Cryptantha with Silene gallica off to the left. There were 2 or 3 Cryptanthas, and I know I can figure out what that one is, I just don't remember. There are reports of Laia from the island, but no specimens. And when you see Lasthenias like this, you can sort of see how that could happen. Although these plants are small. They're typical goldfield size. And then this was a major thing for me, was to find this plant. That's a Schultzia palmeri, and that's it in fruit. And that's the size that most people thought that they were because of the goats. And again, it can get huge. That's the same plant, just in a different location. And the flowers are quite distinctive, as are those pods. They're very broad and flat and incredibly blue. So, quite a nice plant. And we saw lots of them of this size. I like this plant. And that's one, this huge, like, Christmas tree one. So I did get some good seed collections off of this, and we'll be sowing them this winter as well. We did find an albino form of Lavatera occidentalis. Sort of, wow, exciting. Not really. But just something different. And I just thought this was funny. There's just so much space and everyone's in a little cluster, deciding where we should go next, how we should get back down. This is after we went up that canyon, and then we went off to the north. And then it was, where are we? So we went down into this other canyon, and we found palm trunks. We didn't see any palm trees that were live in this area, but there were several trunks like this. And Mara. Mara is interesting. Reed Morin says that there was never enough material to determine what anything was, because the goats always ate everything and they never could get any fruits, and they wanted to know whether the fruits were spiny or not. Well, there's one that's not spiny at all. And there's one that's really spiny. And there's one that's really spiny with one that's not hardly spiny at all. So we're not really sure what is happening with these maras, and whether there is more than one taxon there or not. Did collect some seeds, and the seeds also were quite different from one another. And we were finding quite a bit of these. Yeah, you can see there's another bigger fruit right to the top that has no spines. And again, just a fascinating thing to see, since nobody had really seen these. So then after that, the next day we went down to the south end, which was one of the more weird days. And one of the things we all wanted to see was this. This is a big cinder cone with a crater that's intact, and it's called Plaza de los Torres. And that it looks like, when you look at it online on Google Earth and stuff, it looks like it may have water in the base. That's it from the outside, and as we're walking toward it. And it doesn't look like it'd be that difficult to go up, does it? But it's all this big lava field of rough lava that's just coated with lichens. It was amazing. And the views off to the south of those islands were also amazing. And then that's the bottom. Needless to say, there's no water there ever. And that's a person way in the distance. Right there. And it was really kind of dull. There was lithium down there. Not the easiest thing, but we also found this assassin bug. And we also found on the outside, on the cinder cone itself, Mammillaria blasfeldiana variety Shirleyana. One of these things that's not very well known or described. But there it is in bloom. And then the island was home to two Castelleas. Castellea guadalupensis was a shrubby one that could be 3-4 feet tall. it's gone, or no one has seen it in over 100 years. And there aren't that many of this, Castanea fruticosa. But this one little spot, we found like 8 of them. And it's a nice, pretty perennial subshrub. Fruticosa, meaning shrubby. And then we would find, again, more of the dynandras with more of the lupins. And this is where the lupin seeds were whitish with black speckles. And the Dynandra greeniana. In this part, again, this is Malpomene wash, hotter, drier, in much better flower. And goat corpse. And you can see the difference that made to the immediate surroundings from the flesh decomposing. You can see all of the what is it? Crystallinum. Yeah, a weed, but very happy right around where all of the nutrients from the decomposing goat would have fallen. And off to the left, upper left, you can see what it's like on the areas adjacent. That's the same Carbogrotus, or what is that? Crystallinum. Mesembryanthemum, yes.
Are there vultures around?
No. Mm-mm. There were caracaras. There was an endemic caracara that was eliminated by collectors for various museums from the early part of the 1900s. There are amazing lichens of all kinds. This one I didn't see quite as many of, but I just thought it was photogenic. And this is a famous cinder cone with the Dynandra greenianas just sort of dotted across it. And again, it's not that there should be more of them, it's just that's what it does. And when I was out walking up this ridge by myself, I found this little Camiscice, and then I took a picture of it, and when it came down and was talking with John, he said, no one has seen that plant on this island for decades. So sometimes you find these little weedy things that end up being something better. This was clearly something interesting. That's just one leaf of Lomatium insulare going dormant toward the south end of the island. Very dissected, almost leathery leaf. And then this is where we got in trouble. This is at the south end of the island, and this is a very rare endemic Baereopsis guadalupensis, monotypic genus, and it's sort of a succulent goldfields. And pretty amazing. And that looks so close, doesn't it? But it was horrendously windy, and I'm down on my stomach and leaning over a cliff to get these photos. And so, not all of us are doing stuff like this. And then when we turned around, there were all these guys with rifles. And they were saying, what are you doing here? Well, they were speaking in Spanish. And fortunately, Julio said, yes, they were with him and we were fine. And they were saying, you can't be by the edge, you'll fall off. And so they made us go away. But we did see a lot of this other one then, Dynandra palmeri was very nearby, silvery foliage, almost wreath-like in its growth habit. Also perennial. That again is how we drove around, and that is at the south end of the island, and that's where you could look off and again see that is Lote Negro, where Dudleya palmeri is. So or Dudleya guadalupensis, sorry. So we did not see that. But at the south end of the islet, there also is an albatross rookery. This had moved onto the main island at the south end in recent years. And how many of you have ever been to an albatross rookery? Oh, quite a few. You know that these things are like big fat bowling pins and that they don't move. And so what they would do is if you got near them, they would stand up and then they'd sort of rock from side to side and then they'd sit down. And that was their big action for the day. But what's happened is that the cats have found them. And so these things are so big and fat when there are chicks like this that they don't move much. And so the cats, what the cats do is pretty gross. They come up behind them and they just eat them while they're alive, while they're just sitting there. So that's why they're trapping the cats. Well, that's another reason why they're trapping the cats. But the adults would also let you get very, very close to them. And then they would just spread their wings, and it was so windy that they were just immediately gone. Very fast moving, very impressive, huge birds. And that's from the rookery looking off to the two islands. The one that we wanted to go to, or what I really wanted to go to, was this one, because that's where Eriogonum zapatoensis is. And that's the only place it is, and the Lavatera lindleyi. But you can see how rough the water is. That's spray hitting the vertical face there. And what you have to do is jump off of a boat and grab onto the sea palms and sort of shimmy up before the next big wave comes. Steve Junak has done it several times, and he said, oh yeah, you could do that. And so that's the inner islet. No one had ever been on because there's no place to climb up. But when John Rebnam was there, around 5 years earlier, it was with a big expedition that had a helicopter with it, and he was actually dropped onto the top. And he botanized there, but it was a crappy year, and he said there was nothing that was different. So again, it's East Lote Zapato is the good one. And that the island here in the foreground, that little pinnacle one, you see that it's sort of brownish. On the side that's right adjacent to the shade. You'll see that plant in a minute. But there again, you see how high the water hits onto the side of that, and that is where you jump off, right there, and scramble up. And then this is a crater in here, and there's Baryopsis. The Julio, who said he swam from a boat out here to the island, and this area is known great white shark spot. So that was not a smart thing to do. But he was doing censuses of the albatrosses, and the albatrosses are now hanging out on the Eriogonums, so that's not a pretty picture. They're breaking them all. So anyway, and that Eriogonum also has yellow flowers, by the way, and it's in the Giganteum complex. And you can again see how rough the water was. And that's the point, and that's the military base where they came up and surprised us from. And we went down there. Yeah, I can't imagine being stationed there. They have to go get the water all the way at the opposite end of the island as well. And there's that little islet again, and all that brown is Cystanthe guadalupensis. And that's a Guadalupe Island fur seal there in the water. And there's one right there, very close up. These were almost hunted to extinction, but now there's a good healthy population out here. There is one known Cystanthe guadalupensis on the main island, and that's it. We hiked over to it. Steve Junak knew where it was, and it was still the only one there. And so these were our support staff, Ezekiel, Esmeralda, and Jorge, who took us around, and Esmeralda was our cook. While we were there, it was Sula's birthday, and she made a huge cake for her. And that's our crew. And that's, again, thanks to the GG Foundation for funding the expedition, and Hesse for their assistance with transportation and logistics, and for use of the field station. And that is what frequently happens with Guadalupe Island. It does all these amazing eddies that can go for miles and miles in the clouds and the fog, giving you an idea of its position in the stream of things. So, thank you.